I'm Mitch McCracken, and my guest on my first podcast is my lifelong friend and radio icon, the man who has been called the ambassador of Memphis music, Mr. George Klein. Now, GK passed away in February of 2019. I interviewed him a couple of years before that. Here's part of that conversation on Memphis Music Interview, Memphis Music History, told from the inside.
Okay, Mitch, let's roll, baby.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about your radio career. You started in Osceola, Arkansas, right?
Well, that was my first real radio job. But, Mitch, I was, like everybody else, wanting to get on the air, and I was hanging around stations and doing anything I could. And whenever I could meet a jock, I'd meet him and talk to him. And I was doing odd stuff and nothing heavy. And then I got that gig at HBQ with being Dewey Phillips' sidekick. HBQ had just received their license from the FCC to do television. It was Channel 13, and so they went on the air. And they set up World Quick Studios in the Chiska Hotel ballroom, and they needed the guy Bob Lewis, who was Dewey's sidekick. He moved across the hall to TV and eventually ended up as program director for television. Real sharp guy. And so then they needed somebody to replace Bob. So they asked me. It was Dick Covington, who went on to Boston as a heavyweight jock. Anyway, Dick said, "GK, we need somebody. We know that you're Dewey's. You're helping out with baseball. The baseball game would go off about 9 o'clock, and that's about time Dewey would come on." So Dick Covington, the PD, said, "Hey, GK, what do you do when you get off?" I said, "Well, nothing. I go home." He said, "Wait a minute." He said, "We need somebody to babysit Dewey because Dewey doesn't, he can tear up a studio." And I did that for almost a couple of years with Dewey. I was still going to Memphis State at the time. I was approaching my senior year, and so I knew that this ain't gonna work. I've got to get some really formal training and some actual experience if I'm ever going to do this job. I just can't step right into a show on the air at HBQ, medium market station without no experience. So I sent out about like everybody else did back in the old days. You make a little those little quarter-inch tapes that maybe it was 5 minutes in the reel in the box,
Uh-huh.
And I met air checks and a resume, and I mailed them to all the radio stations in the Mid-South, about 20 of them. One guy called me from Osceola, Arkansas, and he said, "Hey, man, I got your air check." He said, "Can you come over here and do an interview with me, possible employment?" And I said, "Okay." I said, "But, man, I don't have a car." He said, "Well, there's a Greyhound bus that drops you off right in front of the station." And it was. But that's how bad I wanted it, Mitch. Just like you, I wanted it really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, I'd go up there. I'd get on a Greyhound bus, and I'd drive, and I rode it to Osceola, Arkansas, and the bus came to a stop. And I said, "Let me off, man." He said, "I said, that's where I'm going." So I went in there and interviewed with a guy, and he hired me. Going to pay me $50 a week. And then the radio station had me a room in a rooming house, and the rooming house was only about 2 blocks from the station. And so I lived there. Then I'd eat at one of the restaurants, and wasn't too far from the station. And then on the weekends, I didn't have a car, so I'd get out on the highway and hitchhike home, man. The middle of July, second week in July, I did this routine, and you've heard the story. And so the guys dropped me off, and I went to see Dewey, and he said, called her by mother. "Hey, mother, come here, I want you to hear something." This is before he went on the air that night. And I said, "What?" He put the record on a turntable, Mitch, and held his hand over the label so I couldn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Who is that singing?" I said, "Man, I don't know." He said, "You should know. You went to high school with him." I said, "Wait a minute. The only guy in high school you sang was Elvis Presley." He said, "That's Elvis." I said, "You mean Elvis got a record out?" He said, "Yeah, man. Sam brought it up to me last night. I interviewed Elvis. He said, 'Tell you hello.' He said, 'I played it 7 times. I think he's got a smash.'" And I said, "Really, Dewey?" He said, "Yes, the kid's got something, man." So at the end of that summer, I said, "Shit, I got to get out of this Osceola thing, and I can't blow my college degree because I've only got 2 semesters left, and I got to go get that, So I came back to Memphis and was going to go to summer school that year so I could knock out. I went to both semesters of summer school and took the max of hours and got out of college in 3.5 years. So in the meantime, I went to all the radio stations, and I said, "I ain't going to be a gopher for doing it. I'll hang out with him, but I got to get some experience." So that summer in Osceola, Mitch, you've worked in a small town, hadn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you do everything. You pull a copy off the machine, you read a copy, you type commercials, you read your own commercials, you get the music, program the music, and you just do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was learning how to do everything. So when I came back, at that time, the station was called KWEM. It's called KWAM now. Went by there, and the guy said, he said, yeah, man, that's all I got is a Saturday and Sunday job. I said, okay. He said, well, we only pay so-and-so. I said, man, I ain't worried about money. I want the experience. He said, I think he paid me for 2 days, $50,
Mm-hmm.
And all I was making no sale was $50 a week,
Right.
So anyway, it just so happened Johnny he wasn't with a label at that time. He was a appliance salesman. Now I only found out later, I didn't know it, that he had somebody taping that or recording it, and that's what he used when he auditioned for Sam Phillips. He said, here's the tape. I'm on KWAM on Saturday. Well, Sam knew the deal. You had to buy your own time. And he said, well, you don't have a record deal? He said, no. So Johnny would come in, and later on, many years, Johnny and I laughed about it.
Well, now, let me ask you, George, when you did that show, did you do it on Broadway or Flicker Street?
Flicker.
Okay.
I was on Flicker. I never worked in the Broadway studios. So I get a letter from a call from Bill Grumbles. Grumbles, when I was Dewey's gopher, he was general manager of WHBQ Radio and part TV or something. So Mr. Grumbles knew who I was, and he called me and he said, GK, he said, Bill Grumbles. I said, hey, Mr. Grumbles. He said, what time you get off there? I said, I get off at 9. He said, what are you doing at lunchtime? I said, nothing. He said, let's have lunch. And so I said, okay. By this time, Mitch, he had gone to WMC to be general manager of radio there, of their stations. And he said, GK, he said, how's that little show going for you over there? And I said, Mr. Grumbles, I don't know. I said, but I'm getting about 75 letters a day. He said, 75 letters a day? I said, yes, sir. He said, have you seen the ratings? I said, seen the ratings? I said, Mr. Grumbles, they can't subscribe to the ratings. They don't have the budget to subscribe to the ratings. We ain't seen no ratings over there. He said, well, look at this. He said, did you know that you're number 2 in the market in the morning? I said, what? I'm number 2 at all these great jocks in the morning in Memphis radio? And he said, yeah, but the jocks in Memphis radio in the morning are middle-of-the-road jocks. And he said, you're the only one playing the music that the young people want. And he said, and he's a pretty sharp guy. He said, George, I think something is happening with this rock and roll, and it's going to be big. He said, I want you to be right on the edge of it, a forerunner. I said, what are you talking about, Mr. Grumbles? He said, I'm going to hire you if you want to come. And over there at Embassy that time, John Fuller was on the air. He had some great voices. Jack Eaton was a jock over there. He wasn't a news guy. He was a jock.
Yeah.
He'd come in from Georgia somewhere and had some really good voices on the air. So he said, I want to put you on the air in the afternoon on WMC. He said, I got some ideas. He said, we're going to call it the George Klein Rock and Roll Ballroom. And he said, we're going to promote you. We're going to put billboards up. We're going to put bus cards out. We got a TV station. We can run spots on you on that. He said, we're owned by a commercial appeal. He said, so we'll get you a story in a paper, big picture. And I said, wow, Mr. Grumbles. He said, yeah, we're going to see what happens. Well, Mitch, I went on the air, and that's where that famous picture of me and Elvis was made. And Stan Torgerson had come over to be program director because he'd worked for Mr. Grumbles at HBQ doing sports, and Mr. Grumbles hired him as program director. So he called me in. I'd worked with him recreating those ball games. I'll never forget what he said, Mitch. He called me and he said, GK, sit down. I said, yeah, what's up, Stan? He said, this is going to really be tough for me. It's going to hurt me more than you. I said, what are you talking about? He said, man, we'll have to let you go. I said, let me go? What are you talking about? I got great ratings. I got big numbers. I said, I'm hot. I'm the number 1 jock in the afternoon now. He said, I know it. He said, but he said, we think this rock and roll stuff, we think it's a fad. We think it's like calypso and mambo and tango. And he said, we think it's just a fad. And you're the only rock jock on the station. Everybody else is playing middle of the roos, and it's just not working. That very night, I went up to tell Dewey. And who should walk in but Elvis? And he said, GK, why weren't you on there today? And I called him. I said, well, I said, I told him. He said, what? Fad? He said, fad. He said, we'll show him what kind of fad it is. I said, what you talking about? He said, you're going with me. I said, where are we going? He said, you're out of work. I said, yes, I'm hiring you. You're going to travel with me. And he said, we'll show him what kind of fad it is. He said, we're going all across America. We're going to Canada. We're going to Hawaii. We're going to Hollywood to make a movie called Jailhouse Rock, and you're riding with me. I said, oh, man, that was great. Because I didn't have anything to do, Mitch. I graduated from college, and I was out of work. So, I was single. So, man, I started hanging with him, and we went on the road, and we did all that stuff. And I never ever saw Torgerson after that. I used to remind Jack Eaton about that. But he later on became the Ole Miss play-by-play football guy. So I did that, and then so I traveled with Elvis about a year and a half or so. I knew Elvis was getting ready to go in the Army, and so I knew that I had to get back into radio because there wasn't any future traveling with Elvis, Mitch. Colonel Parker had everything locked up, and you couldn't get close to Elvis management-wise, even though I was living with him. I mean, I just didn't have the experience to be a manager, assistant manager, or front man or something, And Elvis actually wanted me with him because all he had with him at that time was Gene Smith, his cousin, and Arthur Hooten, a guy from the neighborhood. So, his neighborhood. So, and we were going up Detroit, Chicago, Philly, Cleveland. We were, man, on we hit every big city but New York City. And so, man, we were traveling, and then I was okay, GK, we're going to Hollywood. And we went out to Hollywood, made Jailhouse Rock. Elvis goes in the Army, and I said, Elvis, this has been great traveling with you, man. It's a dream come true to be a jock and travel with the biggest guy in rock and roll. I said, Elvis, I got to have a career for myself. He said, oh, man, I could tell that GK that she loved radio. And he said, don't worry about it. He said, I got to go in the Army. There'll be a place for you when I get out of the Army. I said, okay, Elvis. So he went in the Army. I'm skipping around because we did make King Creole. I went down on that. And then he went in the Army after King Creole. So anyway, I went in, got a job at WHHM. WHHM was a 250 watter, but it was a hip station. And started working there. And then in fact, Bill Grumbles eventually became the owner. And then Grumbles, something happened. And I was over there, and Jay Cook was over there, and Chuck Browning was over there, and John Folan was there. Man, we had a hell of a staff. And but they didn't have the money to promote the station. And it was a hot little station, so they started letting people go. And they let me go from over there, but it wasn't because of anything I didn't do. It just Grumbles was going to sell the station, and et cetera, et cetera. So I went over to HBQ because Jay Cook had already left, and he heard what was going to happen. So he went over at HBQ, and he got on, and he called me and said, GK, we got opening on the all-night show. He said, why don't you come over and throw your hat in the ring? I said, okay. So I went over there, and Here for Sale hired me to do all nights. And on WHBQ, I was going midnight to dawn. So I said, this should be kind of fun. You ever done an all-night show, Mitch?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Well, the chicks call you like crazy.
Yeah.
And the girls start calling, and it's kind of fun, man. They talk sex. You know how it goes.
Right.
So I was having a lot of fun, and I was learning, really good equipment. And Dewey would be there when he'd get off at midnight. I'd come on at midnight. And so it was kind of cool because Martindale was doing mornings, and there were some good jocks there, man. Jack Parnell was there, Wink Martindale, and who else was there? Froland was there. John Froland was there again. And I forget who else. But anyway, I was doing midnights. So I went and told Hugh Purcell, the PD, I said, Hugh, we were hot, Mitch. It was us and MPS, but we were beating their brains out. And we were red hot, man, because we had a hot staff, and HBQ was hot because of the history of the station and all, and Dewey and everything. So that's right about the time they let Dewey go. And they told Dewey, we're gonna go more of a personality format station, and we don't think he fit, which was stupid. They should have kept Dewey on, still let him do his stick night at midnight. But so anyway, they let Dewey go, and he went over Little Rock for about a year, I think, or 6 months, and didn't like Little Rock, and came back, started working at that station in Millington, where I was. So anyway, so I was working midnights, and finally they moved me up to 9 to midnight, and then eventually after about a year, they moved me up 6 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
and that's when I caught fire. And I had a 42 share of the audience at night.
Wow.
From 6 to 9 or 6 to 10, whatever time I was on. And I still got that right up somewhere on Pulse. It was Pulse at that time.
Uh-huh.
Had a 42 share, man. So I was red hot. DJ GK, rocking HBQ. I didn't do the rhymes.
Right.
They told me I couldn't do rhymes, and let's just drop one in, catchy one, but I didn't do the rhymes. And I got red hot. And then they came to me and they said, Wink had already left and gone to Hollywood. And a guy named Ron Maroney got Dance Party. It was called Dance Party. And then Ron Maroney left and went somewhere, and Jay Cook got it. And
Mm-hmm.
Jay was doing afternoon drive 3 to 6, and I was coming home working 6 to 9. And then Jay was doing, they called Jay in. They said, Jay, we're having to change the format from Dance Party to Talent Party. And Jay said, why? And they said, well, all this integration thing is starting to happen, and we just don't want to cause any problems,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, read between the lines. So Jay said, okay. So then Jay did that, and then Jay told me one day, because I'd seen when he's going off here, I'd be coming on, and I knew Jay from HHM days. So he said, GK, he said, I'm getting ready to leave. He said, I think I want to manage a station or be program director. And I said, oh, Jake, man. He said, yeah. And he said, also, TV is not my thing. He said, it's kind of cool and all that to be on TV. He said, well, I said, what are you saying? He said, they're going to open up an auditions. They're going to open auditions only for the HBQ jocks for the Talent Party show. It was called Talent Party at that time. They'd only been changed to Talent Party about 3 months, So I went and auditioned, got the show, and then the place went crazy when I got to Talent Party, because I knew, Mitch, that what they were doing at that time, they had a remote. It looked like a remote disc jockey standing in the TV studio,
right?
And you're playing records, and people come in, you'd interview them, and then you'd have guests on, and then you'd show some videos of acts. The record companies would send you.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a not happening show. So I went in and I told them, I said, look, Lance Roswell at that time was the PD. And see, I left out the fact that I did some wrestling. I was his cohort. I knew that I needed some TV experience when I was doing 6 to 9. And I said, Lance, if you ever have any openings over at TV? He said, just so happened, he said, the guy's my sidekick on wrestling. He said, George is leaving. He said, well, you want to do that? I said, sure. Because then, Mitch, I knew that I learned TV. I learned angles, camera shots, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a sidekick. And then when I left, Dave Brown got it. And then, of course, Dave Brown went on to big time in the weather locally, So anyway, Talent Party got rid of was just there. It was okay, but it wasn't happening. And so I went in and I told, I said, Lance, I got an idea. He said, what? I said, this show ain't happening. I said, I'm doing, what y'all want me to do, but I can just tell by the feedback from the audiences and when I go out in the city and, people not talking about the show. So he said, what's your idea? And I said, Lance, there's a whole lot of recording going on. Memphis had exploded recording-wise. There was Stax was happening, High Records was happening, Sun was happening, Chips Moen was happening. Everybody was, Scotty Moore just got tragedy on Thomas Wayne. It was just happening. It exploded as a record place, a recording area,
Mm-hmm.
So he said, well, what's your thoughts? And I said, well, I know all these guys because being on the radio, I hang out with them after I get off, or they come to me at my radio show, or the record labels are bringing them by. And I said, I know all these acts, man. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to bring them in and put them on TV since it's called Talent Party. And I said, we'll let them lip sync their record. And I said, then we'll interview them and we'll be loaded up with good talent. He said, George, the only way we can do that is you got to have a big star break the barrier. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're scared that if you just bring in just a local African-American guy, he said that we may get some complaints, So I knew where he was coming from, but I knew we wasn't getting complaints. So anyway, Fats Domino was coming to town. And so I called the record label, because I knew the promo people, and I said, "Hey, Fats is coming in." "Yeah, GK, what do you need?" I said, "Well, man, I need him for my TV show. He'd be the first African American to be on Memphis television, on a music show like this. So let us talk to him." Well, they called me back and they said, "GK," they said, "Fats will talk to you, but he's not sure he wants to do TV." I said, "Okay." So I went down and he was playing in the old auditorium. Downtown Elvis Auditorium. And I said, "Fats, how you doing?" "Oh, what's up?" We became buddies after that. He talked with that you worked in New Orleans. You know how they talk.
Yeah.
"Oh, man, that New Orleans African-American slang, "Hey, what's up, my man? Just get some barbecue when I get off there,
Creole.
New Orleans, I love, and all that stuff." So I said, "Fats, I really need you for my TV show." And he said, "Well, George, I know you play my records. I really appreciate that. He said, I do your radio." He said, "But I don't do much TV, man. I don't do much TV." And I said, "Fats, can I be straight with you?" He said, "Yeah, what's up?" I said, "If you do my TV show, you'll be the first black on Memphis television to do a musical show like this." And I said, "It'll break the barrier. It'll open the door for the other blacks." He said, I never forget what he said, Mitch. He said, "Let's go, baby." and so on the way, he said, I called the station and I had the news crew, the TV. What way I did it was, I called it. I had alerted the program director of television that I may get Fats Domino, and I said, "Can you get the 10 o'clock news crew to stay over to film him if I get him?" They said, "Yeah, GK, if you get him, but let us know so we don't have to pay these guys till midnight if you don't show up." I said, "Okay." So I made a quick call and I said, "Look, I got Fats. He's coming after the show night. We'll be down there. The news goes off at 10:30. We'll get there about 10:30. Have a set up for Fats Domino." They said, "Okay." So Fats said, "GK, I'll do your show on 2 conditions." I said, "What's that, Fats?" He said, "You got to take me." I said, "I'll do that." And he said, "Number 2 is," he said, "I got to have a little taste, man." He was talking about whiskey, a drink.
Yeah.
And I said, "Fats, according to the FCC, man, we get in trouble having drinking in the studios, man." He said, "Well, got to have it." I said, "Okay." So I stopped at a liquor store down on Union Avenue on the way, and I said, "What do you want?" He told me, got a little pint of whiskey. And so I got to the station, and I grabbed the program director or the producer, and I said, "Look, this has got to be very secretive." He said, "What?" I said, "Fats has got to have this little whiskey in the studio." I said, "But we can put it under the piano, and I'll get him a paper cup, and nobody will see it. And between songs, he can take him a little sip, a little nip there." I said, "Okay, GK, well, because he's such a big star, we'll do that." He was a big star at that time. So we brought it in. Man, he did not only 2 songs, he did 4 songs for me. And, man, I couldn't wait to get him on the air. And when I got it on the air, it was all over, Mitch. Man, here comes Jackie Wilson. Here comes Sam Cooke. Here comes James Brown. Here comes Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Isaac Hayes. Man, I had him, man. Then I knew that Shindig was hot at that time. So I was watching. You ever watch Shindig?
Oh, yeah. And Hullabaloo.
Remember, they had 6 great-looking girl dancers.
Right, yeah.
And man, they shook their heads and all had great figures and real good-looking Hollywood girls. So I knew that I was on the show, but I knew that I had to have something to draw the males in because the chicks were checking me out like crazy. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing a remote show at the Claridge Hotel, a thing called The Place. It's on Saturday afternoon, live on WHBQ radio, noon to 1, and where the kids would come downtown on Saturday afternoon. They come to the Variety Club, and they dance, and then we'd be on the air with them, and then they go home, and they do a little shy. It was a big deal back in the day, Mitch. Kids come downtown on Saturday afternoon. So these 2 girls came up to me, really good looking, and they said, "Man, we love your show, man, but you got one thing missing." And I said, "What's missing?" They said, "Man, you need to put some girl dancers on there." And we're with the Charlotte Morgan Dance Studio. I said, "Man, I don't want no 1, 2, 3 kick shit." I said, "I want something like them Shindig dancers." I said, "We can do that. We can do that. What do you say our girls on in our group?" I said, "Okay." I said, "Where are you located?" They said, "We're right near HBQ. We're down there near Park and Highland, Charlotte Morgan Dance Studio." I said, "Okay." I said, "When are y'all there?" And they told me. I said, "Okay, one night I'm going to come by and look at y'all." I went by Mitchell one night during the next week and looked at them, and I said, "Holy shit." I mean, Mitch, they were all great looking. One of them became Mrs. America later on. One of them was top 10 Miss America. One of them was top 10 Miss Tennessee. 2 of them became Miss Memphis,
Mm-hmm.
And they were really good looking, man. So I went back to the station and I told Lance Russell, I said, look, Lance, I said, I want to duplicate the Shindig Dancers Home Talent Party. I said, because we need some good looking girls to draw the guys in to watch. He said, what you got? I told him. He said, well, let's give it a shot. It sounds interesting. He said, what are we going to call him? I said, well, I've come up with a catch name. He said, what? I said, it's a play on words. He said, well, what is it? I said, the WHBQs. He said, oh, I love that. He said, well, get them down here. We got them down there, and of course the crew loved them because they were so great looking, and they were very friendly. They weren't stuck-up girls. They were very friendly. I mean, they weren't flirtatious or they weren't cheap, but they were just friendly. They weren't, East Memphis highfalutin chicks. They were just regular chicks, Mm-hmm. And so I put them on, man, and what I knew, Mitch, was I had to get a current song into the show. Because these guys were coming in and they were lip syncing their records. Well, some of them were old records, were hits a year ago, or whatever. And then some of them were new and the kids weren't used to them. So what we did, I'd get the hot record of the week and I'd give them to the girls and I'd give them to my producer and I said, look, get the girls to dance to this record. That'll get current music into the show. And they got on the show and shit, they became stars, man. Mm-hmm. The little girls, they were great looking and they were hanging out, and boy, the guys was chasing them. They loved it, And that was the story of the WHBQs, and we did that show for 12 years, Talent Party.
Yeah.
And then things started changing, et cetera, et cetera. When HBQ went down, and all that went down, I went to work for. I was at home one day, and Jerry Phillips it was Jerry called me, and Sam Phillips' son. He said, "Kid, what you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just chilling out, HBQ was changed, and the Talent Party went off there, and he said, we're putting in a station. Sam hired you in Millington. I said, yeah. He said, he promised you if ever got anything in Memphis, he gave you a shot. I said, okay. So he was out there on Mount Moriah. That's when he was starting to put together all of his big stations, And so he had to think, he said, we're going to name a station after Elvis, WLBS, he's going to call it, and we're going to play country music, but it's going to be rock country instead of just regular Webb Pierce stuff. And I said, okay, so I went and worked for Sam for a couple of years, and then let me see, after that, that's when George Flynn bought HBQ.
Right.
And then he was going to call me, and he said, GK, I want to talk to him. He's an unusual guy.
Yes,
Mitch,
he is. I work for him.
Man. Okay, well, you know how he is. Yeah. He liked me, but so anyway, he said, I'm going to put HBQ, but HBQ at that time was a news talk sports station, and he bought it. He stole that station, man. He gave $1 million to RKO for that station. Mm-hmm. He got all the equipment. He got that land where the transmitter is out in Fraser. He really got a steal, man. Mm-hmm. So, and he was renting the studios. They told him he could still stay in the building for a while. So he converted those whatever studios they had there to studios, and so he hired me away from Sam. And
well, let me ask you. I want to ask you an Elvis question. When you were traveling with Elvis, and before he went into the service,
yeah,
and then when he came back, I mean, how did the tremendous success affect him, or did it?
When he came back out of the Army?
Yeah.
Well, by that time, Mitch, he'd already made Jailhouse Rock. No, he made Let Me Tender, Jailhouse Rock, and King Creole. He'd already done 3 movies.
Right.
He was a lot more polished and a lot more well-read, and he would read a lot. Mm-hmm. And so when he came out of the Army, he was concerned, too, what would happen. Then he went out to Hollywood and made that G.I. Blues, and hell, he was a hit all over again. Right. And so then he stuck to movies. And so he started doing those movies. He was getting like $1 million up front, 50% of the picture, and all the album music out of the movie was going to him and Colonel Parker. Mm-hmm. So they was making a lot of money on those movies. And so he said, I'm going to do movies for a while. So he did, a lot of movies. And then it was, 69, was it? Yeah, he went back on the road, right. 68, 69. Right. And it was he told Colonel, he said, after we do this last movie, which I think was Charo or something, he said, let's let the movie contracts run out. He said, I've done 33 movies, he said, and he's 31 regular movies and 2 musical documentaries. And he said, I want to go back and live shows. And the Colonel said, live shows? He said, yeah, I'm getting tired of this movie stuff. It's the same story, different, location. Mm-hmm. He said, the music's not heavy, and he said, I want to get back in the mainstream.
and get back into the mainstream he did with the NBC 1968 Comeback Special, which aired on December 3rd, 1968, and was a tremendous success. Then, in January of 1969, Elvis entered American Studios, 827 Thomas Street in Memphis, Tennessee, to record his first #1 hit in 7 years, Suspicious Minds. Make sure you're with me for the next Memphis Music interview, Memphis Music History, told from the inside, next Monday morning at 8:30 Memphis time. When George Klein talks about the station he worked for in L.A., Fats Domino, James Brown, and Rick Dees. I'm Mitch McCracken, and I hope to see you then.